Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the New Cow Corner again. I got a special guest for you today, Mr. Nate, Nature Nate. We're going to be discussing bovia geckos, one species I am absolutely not familiar with at all. They come from the islands, I guess, of
Yes.
New Caledonia, where my heart is. Clearly, anybody that knows me knows that I have about 200 New Caledonian geckos. All of them except for a few species, this being one of them. So I'm here to learn with you guys today, man. I'm super excited about this. Nate, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your company, your business, what you got going on real quick?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me as a second time
It's an honor.
visitor, long time listener. I really enjoyed. You're I want to say it's the Polychris, the monkey tail anole episode y'all just did was like fascinating. I actually keep them just
Awesome,
for
man.
fun. Yeah, I have a pair.
That's cool. See,
yeah,
you guys should come together, man. I don't think a lot. I was blown away when he was saying there's just a handful of people that have them. It being such a cool
Yes.
species. Damn, that's good to know. It's cool.
Yeah, so I'm Nate. I've been interested in. I started with insects and amphibians, and then made my way over. Started with a cresty, and then I've always been a diversity guy. I just love a little bit of everything. I fish. I raise insects. I raise moths. I've got this like crazy plant room. Also, future podcast. That's a fish scale gecko set up over there, so we can talk about that someday. And you just fell really, really hard in love with crested geckos because they were so easy. I love easy pets. And then it has slowly kind of become a side business now. This is the first year that I would say Nature Nate Geckos is, I mean, it's been profitable in before when I used to breed like mantises and beetles and stuff. But now, I'm breeding, it was like 10 new species last year. And every year I'm trying to add. So like this year really expanded into skinks. And kind of the common theme for a long time throughout my entire collection was, does it eat Pangea? If it ate Pangea, I wanted to keep it because I'm already making Pangea. It's just so easy for me. And almost everything I keep will eat Pangea. And so that's what got me into, I got a crested gecko. It was a red bicolor. Eventually, heard about gargoyles. I was like, okay, the care is the same. Then I heard about Chihuahua, and like Chihuahua were amazing. I got a Yuri. And then from there, just naturally got into breeding. And then there was kind of like the past, a couple of years where I really was just all about diversity. So I got pretty much everything that is in New Caledonia that we have in the hobby. And so that led me to the Botvaia. That's how I pronounce it. I'm not saying that that's the correct way.
How do you pronounce it? I'm sure I'm butchering it. How do you say?
So it's definitely Latin, right? So it's a dead language. So, it's hard for anyone to say that they're right or wrong. I say Botvaia because it's fun for me. But I think, it's named after a guy, a researcher, an explorer who visited New Caledonia. And so I'm sure there is a correct way that he said his name.
What year? Do you know? Do you have any idea on what year? A little bit of the history of when they were discovered or brought to the States?
I don't have. I think. Well, a lot of things were never formally described to science until Charles Linnaeus started the, binomial nomenclature system, which was like I think in like the late 1800s. So a lot of things were formally described for the first time in the 1900s, right? So you may say like 1923, maybe even up or down of that. But I don't actually know the exact date. I don't know how to say it. I say Bavaia because it's fun for me and it rolls off the tongue. And then there's also Gyro Gecko, which we can lightly touch on. And so, they're really cool. They're like a morning gecko on steroids. And I prepared a couple photos courtesy of Google. For anyone watching the video podcast, you can see what some of the juveniles look like. And they really do look like a morning gecko. Some people call them a mini Chihuahua. But they act like a morning gecko in the sense that they are quick. They're kind of like a Sarah. They're not going to just like, can you hold them? Absolutely. I mean, you're seeing pictures of people holding them, but there's something that you kind of have to work with, or like you have to anticipate. It's like I hold my day geckos, but I know they're going to run. I have to tilt my hand. Yeah. It's an anticipation thing.
How big do they actually get?
Huge. So there's, obviously there's just the crested gecko. With Chihuahuas, there's like 2 species. With Lychees, there's really 1 species, but there's a ton of locales. Bothaea are actually probably the most diverse genus in New Caledonia by species. There's at least 16 of them, different species.
that many. I thought 10, and I was like, that's a lot. 16, wow.
And I believe they described like 5 to 10 new ones last year. So actually, the number might be closer to 20, right? And so what these guys are, most of them are very small. We're talking morning gecko size. Some of them smaller or a little bit bigger, a little chunkier.
Okay.
The ones that I work with the most are Bavia robusta, and robust.
Those are
Right,
okay,
large. So they're the biggest ones, and the males of those can easily hit 40 grams, which is actually quite large. That's a cresty.
The gecko size, you know,
Yes.
that's a
Yeah, and my breeding pair would be
Wow.
like a small. Obviously, they don't have the head, so it's kind of hard to compare. But my breeding pair, the males get larger than the females. The male is probably 30 grams or more. He's large. They're not tiny geckos.
good size gecko.
Yeah, and when they hatch out, they quickly hit morning gecko size, like pretty fast, maybe 6 months, less than a year. And then they hit full sexual maturity at about 2 or 3 years. And like I said, I mean, at that point, they're like, it would, like a full grown male would be like here to here and about as chunky, a little chunkier than like my main finger there. Yeah. And of course, they're a sexual species, right? They're not morning geckos in the sense that they don't have males. They do lay eggs. They're nowhere near as fecund as a crested gecko. Like, I have a really hard time getting more than a couple eggs per year. I think they're laying them. I'm just not getting to them, and they don't seem as inclined to use a lay box, which is kind of annoying. I also think I keep my room slightly drier than I'm really supposed to be, but watering takes forever. So I've been experimenting with putting glass on top of the tanks and trying to like keep the humidity. So if I find an egg late, I have a longer window to find the egg. But they do have a lay box, and they live together year round, male and female, no problems. They love Pangea. They also love bugs. They're one of my most bug aggressive New Caledonian geckos by far. Like if I put a cricket at the outside of the tube that they sit in together, they will come all the way out and just nab it from tongs, which is really cool. If you're looking for a New Cal that's a little bit more like a Chihuahua, a little bit more like a small monitor, right? You do that with a cresty, they're probably not going to follow a cricket very far.
So being that there's that many species or subspecies or whatever, do you know how many are actually kept in the hobby? Like how many do we have floating around?
That's a great question. I believe realistically, if you wanted to get one, there's only a handful of us that have them. I got mine from Richie. So, Richie's the gecko specialist, right?
Gecko King.
So I have Robusta. That's my favorite to keep just because if you get much smaller than that, like I said, my theme is Pangea and like ease of care. If something's really a huge pain in the butt, so like I've kept Lygodactylus williamsi, the tiny electric blue day geckos, I've bred them. Anything that size or smaller really irritates me just because the eggs dry out really fast, the babies dry out really, really fast, and if you don't nail the humidity, the only thing I work with that's that small are the Diero geckos and the morning geckos. And so they range in sizes, but you could get this, I think there's like 5 in the hobby. Robusta's the big one. That's what I mainly work with. And then there's Excudia. And Excudia are really cool. They're smaller than Robusta, but they have more aggressive patterning, like black and white, almost banding. And then I think there's like 2 or 3 others. I couldn't name them off the top of my head.
Yeah, the one with the S. My buddy Wally. Do you know Wally from Supreme Geckos?
Yeah. I grew up watching his videos.
Really?
Yeah, he was a big influence on me. Absolutely.
That's awesome, man. I tell him the same thing. That's my boy. He works with one too. The something with an S. Savage. I even speak English, let alone.
No, it's hard to say. It's almost like sausage. It's like Savage, and then it's like 2 eyes. Yeah, it's all Latin, right? Yes. They're naming it after someone else, which just really makes Latin way harder. So there's like 3 right there. I'm pretty positive there's like 1 or 2 more that if you tried really hard or you talked to Richie, like you could definitely get them. And then, like I said, there's at the time 4 or 5 years ago when I got into them, there were 16 described species. I'm sure we don't have all of them in the hobby. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And then like I said, they just named like a year or 2 ago, they named like 9 more. And that's what happens, right? When you have a very small gecko that's very fast, these things are not very likely to go extinct. There's not a ton of predators that can catch them. Like you could keep them with leeches, and I think a leechie would have a really hard time being fast enough to actually catch one, right? And then when you have something that's so small and so fast, obviously it's going to also be hard to describe, right? That's why we're still finding them, and it's very easy for them to speciate because they can take up a very small, like a lychee needs a huge territory, obviously, right? It's gonna be in its own tree hollow, and it's not gonna be able to share. These tiny geckos, I mean, you could probably have 100 of them in like one tree, right? And then it's easier to disperse if it's stuck on a piece of driftwood a hurricane hits, it's very easy for a gecko like this to move
Very true.
to one of the other like 100 tiny islands all over New Caledonia. And then that, of
Very
course, will
true.
lead to more speciation. But yeah, there's probably like 3 or 4 main ones in the hobby, and then if you really looked, you could get like another 1 or 2. Yeah.
But the Robusta is probably, if someone were just getting into them and getting a pet, would
Yeah.
you say Robusta would be like the best to start with?
I would say yes, right? Because the eggs are going to desiccate way less. And then just in terms of enjoyment, right? You want something that you can actually see. And these guys are big.
Yeah.
It's fun to see. You know, they're not huge, but it's nice to actually have something that's a little bit bigger than a Yuri,
Yeah.
full-grown female Yuri, in the tank. Yeah, and they're beautiful. I mean, I showed you some of these pictures.
Yeah.
I wanted to get some
and
of
we'll
my
link
own
some
pictures.
too for the people that don't see them right now. I'm going to link some pictures to the recording so you guys can check them out. Nate's showing some.
I mean, look, you
Yeah,
can
they're
see that's like a
beautiful. They
full-size
look like a
well,
little-
not like, and even then, that's not full-grown. I've got bigger ones than that.
Yeah, they look. I mean, like so many different things. They're
Yeah.
a diplodactyloid. What is it called?
I call them jelly geckos, but they're like the helmeted geckos. Yeah, it's like Diplodactylus gelatus.
Okay.
Yeah. And those are from Australia, right, which is not too far away. And they do
Mhm.
look a ton like them. The difference being the gelatus are terrestrial, whereas these guys can absolutely stick to glass. This
I
is a
genuinely
really-
believe something happened with the Australia, New Caledonian
Oh, yeah.
geckos. At some point with, we had all the, these continental drifts and moving. I genuinely believe, even when you look at like Strophaurus and Eurodactylus, like super, the Uris, for example.
Yes.
It's not, what's it, divergent evolution? It's
Mhm.
not. They're too closely related. There's too many
Right.
science shows they were related. So at some juncture, New Caledonia was part of Australia.
Yes. I mean, you look at the Nautilus geckos, which are in New Zealand, which is also nearby. And the Nautilus ones are those crazy green geckos. They give live birth, but they also eat Pangea.
Richie just got some.
Europe.
Richie just got a pair.
Yes, I know. He's killing me. He's like, he teases me sometimes. He'll text me all kinds of crazy nonsense, and he's like, make me an offer. And I'm like, I'm gonna get divorced if I buy this. Don't do this. No, he's so funny. But yeah, he has a pair. There's like 3 people in the States. If I ever win the lottery, you'll know. I'll just have a profile picture of one of them. It's
Right.
a dream species by far. Like, my wife will ask sometimes, like, what could you get if you could get anything? I'm like, well, if I wanted to be wildly irresponsible, I kind of
Is
have
that
a
what you would
personal
get?
rule. I don't have any individual animal in my room that I spent more than $1,000 on, and that's a hard rule. So, like, if I
That's good for a business. You're making a business. You have to
Yes.
have sellable products, realistic
Yes.
animals, realistic. I respect it, bro. I respect it. That's an awesome business move.
Well, thank you. Also, aren't you based you're in Pennsylvania?
I'm in Connecticut,
Oh,
right
so
between New
you're-
York and
I was gonna
Massachusetts.
Congratulate you on the Eagles win last night.
I'm a
No one-
Dallas fan, dude.
There you go. Well, you're used to heartbreak.
Yeah. Well, let's say I have been for 40 years. I'm debating for next season.
I love that. But yeah, so yeah, they're out there. Richie's always teasing me. And then the other one I would have is those blue tongue skinks that have the crazy knobs to them, like their tail looks like a head.
Shingleback?
The shingleback, thank you. The shingleback
Yeah.
skinks, like that's another one, but they're like $10,000, just like the knob.
That's like another, like a lot of people, it's their
Yeah.
dream animal, man. We talked to a lot of guys on the podcast, and a lot of them, will ask, what would you buy if you could? What would be your dream animal? Dude, so many people say,
But they're like seem like extra friendly, extra cuddly, extra adorable, and then it's like most of us already have blue tongue skinks, right? So it's just an expansion of
Yeah.
what we already love. But as you said, right, like it is a business. I'm now branded. This is the first time ever I got shirts made.
congratulations, brother. That's awesome.
But it's funny because
Awesome.
I'm always like a deal when I buy geckos. I usually try to see like, is there any wiggle room? Because I kind of have like, you do have to kind of have whatever your margin is. And so for me, it's not even about like margin. Like, could I make more money? It's more just about risk. If I spend more than $1,000 on an animal and it has like what I call a gecko heart attack, just like people, every once in a while, even healthy ones just like drop dead. That would be really bad financially for me. And so, yeah.
Sometimes they don't breed,
Yeah, I've never spent more than, I don't think more than like 700. And that was for like the Australian leaf tails, which I actually just sold. So it was actually really sweet to get not only what I paid back, but more because now they're adults and like they've been breeding for a couple seasons. And so, yeah, that's like a big factor. But back to your original point, right? You look at those gray eye and they look just like a New Caledonian gecko, except they have claws, right? They don't have sticky toe pads. because they're more on rocks and stuff instead of like tree bark and leaves. And then yeah, I think a lot of the Australian stuff, it's all it is really similar. Like even the Strophoris, they look like a New Caledonian gecko once again with some feature changes. Whereas you compare that to like the Central American geckos, all look really similar, where they're all very compressed. They're small. They got really baggy skin. They look different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And yeah, I definitely think there was some sort of like they were all together and then they weren't, and then that's how we got what we got.
Hear the story or read any information on that extinct something giganticus, that giant lizard they found, and they didn't know where it was from or whatever. They thought it was from New Zealand. They just put a study out and a report after doing some DNA tests that species is from New Caledonia.
Of course. Yeah. I remember seeing those pictures. It's like the ultimate giant gecko. And
New Caledonia.
They have one that's stuffed, right? I think somewhere in a museum.
Yep.
It's wicked cool. And it doesn't surprise me that these things existed in the same area. And then, like you said, there's divergent evolution and there's convergent evolution, right? And so you have in the Seychelles over like up in North Africa, they have the bronze gecko. It's like Aileronix seychellensis. So you have a whole bunch of basically day geckos, but they're not green. They're all brown or golden. And they have one, the Trachygaster. Have you ever seen this? Trachygaster is almost the size of a lychee. And its temperament is actually very similar. Like, you can hold them. They're a little more flighty. And they eat fruit. So you can feed them Pangea. But they're egg gluers. So when they lay eggs, they glue them.
Like a croquet or something. Are they in the hobby?
Oh, yeah. Richie has some. I got a buddy who has them. They're extremely expensive. They're $3,500 each. They're extremely rare, and they're super protected. Like, this is not something...
I don't think I've even ever seen one. No,
I'll pull up a quick picture just for the sake of...
Please, that'd be awesome, dude.
Trachygaster gecko. There we go.
All about cool geckos, man.
It's called the giant bronze gecko.
Wow.
There's a lot of similarities to a lychee, but like I said, they're a little bit more...
Yeah, they look like almost like a rough snout.
They eat pollen, so you can see that tree picture just below, and then up there, just the size of them is pretty large. They're like a lychee.
No
shit. Really pretty cool. This is another like
cool
dream species, but once again, I mean, only a handful of people have them. I think one of the big dogs, someone like Kurt Lance or something like that, might have them. There's like one or two people that have. I mean, it's like the rough-snouted New Caledonian geckos. Like, you've got to be very serious and very committed to kind of like the business model of like, okay, I'm gonna spend like $7,000 to get a pair, and like
on Thursday with rock geckos.
Okay,
awesome freaking gecko.
Beautiful.
Man.
I mean, there was a point early in my kind of gecko journey where I probably I was legitimately thinking like about selling a kidney.
Wow.
Just like,
well, you're not gonna sell those like you would move crested geckos or
you're gonna sell
smaller
it to
things, but
you're gonna sell it to the big dogs, the specialists. Yeah. And then I was trying to find. Oh, great! So I have an answer for you. I was like Googling this. So the Bavia is in honor of Arthur Bavay. So maybe even be Bavayist, who was a French pharmacist and herpetologist. And there's 41 species of Bavia.
What?
Yes, actually, there's a ton. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about, like the crazy speciation, because you can live in like a tiny tree hollow and then move around from island to island, and then you're never going to see. You're only going to see the other geckos that are like you, right? And so you can just go crazy. And they're so small that, like, I think it's really hard for even birds or anything to pick them off. And so they, unlike a lot of things that are, like, sort of endangered in New Caledonia, I think these things thrive. I think they really do well.
It seems like it. It seems like it. They probably live in close proximity to each other, too. Probably in, like, little colonies,
Yeah.
You could probably... Okay, so can you keep multiple males together? I mean, I wouldn't just say keep 10 males together, but can you keep a colony of...
No, males are real mean to each other.
Really?
I don't know. There's hardly any species of any lizard that I've found that I can get away with males together. I kind of wanted to try it with Yuri's just because it would be, like, efficient, tank-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be trying it this year, but I wanted to ask a couple more, like, experts. I'm like, is this kosher? Is it fine? Because you already seem pretty gentle on each other, so I'm like not super worried of like, okay, if they're fighting, I'm not going to lose one. I can just separate it.
some species, believe it or not, I was reading and spoke to a few people, like some of the leaf-tailed Madagascar leaf-tail species, like the Sicarae.
Okay.
Richie, for example, keeps colonies of them with multiple males. He
Huh.
said that his breeding went through the roof when he introduced a second male to his harem of females. So I did some research and looking around, and some other people do it as well. That male competition
Right.
actually increases the breeding and ultimately, I guess, the production. It's an interesting theory. I don't think a lot of people are willing to put their animals on the line like that, but
Yeah.
it's in some species it's known to actually in with these geckos is to increase the breeding.
Yeah, I think we guys another great podcast you guys did was Jack from Geckos Culture, and I think he was saying the same thing for the bamboos, that he like puts them together and he'll see little nicks, but as long as the animal doesn't look like it's suffering bad, then
Yeah.
you can separate them if you need to.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool, right? Because we have all of these kind of like, it's almost like the Mormon Bible of gecko keeping, where we kind of have like these 16 like almost unspoken rules of like, don't put males together. But
Yeah.
as you say, it makes a lot of sense. Like the competition is sort of like, well, if I don't breed this female,
It's
he's going
natural.
to, and I don't
It's
want him to
natural.
do that. Mm-hmm.
A female, lots of animals, if you watch any documentaries like half like I do, I'm always like, all I'll ever watch is like nature documentaries and David Attenborough stuff. And, I read a bunch of stuff, and it's, that's what they are, the males will put on a display. The female will literally watch, just like birds, the males do their little dance. The female wants to choose her male, right? Like, and I'm sure that does something physically with stimulating eggs. I had a female, just to I'll go off my rant, but I had a female Chihuahua. She was about 3.5 years old, 4 years old, never even laid a dud. Never laid a dud. And I didn't want to introduce a male because I just wanted to wait. I wanted to wait until she was ready, and she produced
Right.
at least a dud or two for me. So I spoke to another buddy of mine, Justin, who breeds them, and told me that he had the same situation. He introduced a male to the female that wasn't laying eggs, and she started producing.
Okay.
Nate, sure as shit, bro, I did it, and she started producing eggs, man.
That's
She
so
wasn't
wild.
producing them because there was no reason for her to produce eggs. I put a male in, and within 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, there was eggs.
That is bizarre. Yeah, and so it is important sometimes. Not, I don't want to say like, you don't want to challenge too many of these rules, because you can learn. I mean, that's the hard part, right? Like as you say, especially if you spent like $700, $1,000 on or $3,000 on a very rare gecko, it's really hard to risk it. And I learned the hard way this year. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but I really love lacertids because they eat Pangea and they can become really personable, right? They're like little monitors. And so I got a whole bunch of wall lizards. I got some of the subspecies like the Clemeri, which is blue, and the Nigrovertus, which is black, on the Roman wall lizard.
Some cool stuff then, man. I didn't even think,
pretty
because I
cool,
know what they are, but I'm like, I don't know a lot of people that do, man. And it's that's super cool. Strange story, but those fence lizards, the European fence lizards, somehow a small population established itself right next to me, dude. Like literally right next to me.
Yeah, you
my
can
buddy
find
sent me a picture, like, what's this? I'm like, where did you take a picture of that? I was like, it looks like a fence lizard. He was like, oh, right down here. I'm like, he was in Greenwich, Connecticut. So I researched it, and sure as shit, I found a bunch of papers and articles about this population. They're not sure where it came from, but these European fence lizards have established themselves and are breeding, making it through winters. Dude, there's 8 inches of snow on the ground right now.
Yeah. So the Italian wall lizards, the main ones, which is like Podacris siculae or something like that, it's like with an S, originally came from Italy because they're Italian wall lizards, right? And they need a brumation. If they don't brumate, they do not lay eggs. It's true for most lacertids. They do so well that you can find them in New York City. And there's a guy, I'm not going to name him. There's a guy who goes to some of like the PA and New York shows, and he sells them for like $25. And I'm pretty sure he's just like catching them. He's told me, he's like, I catch them in New York. And then what's really crazy is like New York's over here, right? But it's like similar latitude as like Italy. And actually my wife and I were considering at one point going to Italy. It was like a really expensive trip, so we kind of just like gave up. But Italy's here, New York is over here across the Atlantic, and then you go all the way to Seattle. And if you go north of Seattle, there's part of Canada called Vancouver Island. Huge, huge island. And they are established there too.
No,
so you're talking about a lizard that's from Italy killing it in Canada. Absolutely crushing it. Like, it's well documented that they're there. You can see them on iNaturalist. Same within New York. People have known forever. They probably came over in the 50s or even before that, to be honest. But they thrive in our climate. Like they need
very similar climates if you think about it. People,
yes.
I'm Italian. I am Italian.
Yeah.
My grandmother was born there. So it's she'll always say it's just like, it's very similar climates. Unless you go south, like my grandfather is from Palermo and like southern Italy,
right,
which is much warmer on the Mediterranean over there. But above where my grandmother is from, Naples and I don't even freaking know. But somewhere up north is just like our climate. So it makes sense. It makes perfect sense that they're thriving,
Yeah. And it is interesting because the Mediterranean doesn't have as much seasonal, like depending on where you're, like in Italy, right? If you're in the mountains, you're definitely going to experience a lot of cold, a lot of hot. And Italy gets like really freaking warm and humid, like North Carolina.
Yeah.
But then even in the Mediterranean, but then those kind of become subspecies where they don't do as well in New York. They're used to heat year round. It's super cool. But I learned the hard way that like you can't do a trio of wall lizards. You can't have multiple males. So I've actually lost a few. It was a sad and sometimes very cheap and sometimes very expensive lesson. Like some of the rare subspecies like the Clemeri and the Nigervertus are like they're like $50 to $200 captive bred, and you can only get them captive bred. And so like losing those sucked. And they just don't play very well with each other. And then I actually was doing some research. I was like, why do these things keep dying? And it's like I have like a trio or like a group of 4, and even a trio, they'll kill one of the females. They'll gang up on a female. You got to keep them in a pair or nothing, almost. Or like maybe you could keep like a lone female or like a lone male. But if you want to breed,
that's good information. That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
So,
it's super awesome that you're honest like this too, Nate. That you're admitting you've had flaws and have lost things. Because a lot of people like to put on a front like they don't lose animals and shit doesn't happen.
Right.
If you keep a significant amount of animals like we do, shit happens, man.
Yeah.
I just lost a leaf tail the other day, man, and that thing killed me. I mean, it was a $350 animal. Effed me up in the head, bro. Like I was really contemplating whether I wanted to keep all these Madagascan species. I'm like, I'm not gonna just keep killing animals here, man. Like we can't do this. But I got my shit together, regrouped, found out what the problem was. You make adjustments, and you continue learning. You continue learning, you continue keeping, you continue improving the species in the hobby. And you admitting that you have had incidences is super noble of you to be that honest. That's very, very cool.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I'm always really honest about it, right? Because when you work with as many species as I do, when you're working with anoles, lacertids, a ton of different species of gecko, plus skinks, plus turtles, like you are gonna, and some of the stuff I bring in is wild caught, and like it goes in a separate room, but you absolutely are gonna lose things to, they come in with like a parasite load or whatever, and there's also trial and error, right? This is my first year really keeping a wide variety of lacertids, and a lot of them are very easy, like a keel-bellied lizard or, whatever, but a lot of them are not super easy. And so that's where I'm always honest with people. I think it'd be crazy if you talk to someone and they're like, oh no, I never lose anything. Like I'll tell you I never lose crested geckos because they're easiest. I mean,
I haven't ever. I've lost tails on them, unfortunately. And after 7 years, dude, in 7 years, I had one lose his tail the first week. I had an incident where he ran around my laundry room because I just got him, so I was keeping my little quarantine thing over there. I was taking him out, doing a little check. He hopped out of my hand, ran behind the cabinet, ran behind the washer and dryer. I'm like, what do I do, So I put a stick behind there to try to get him on the stick and pull the stick out. I get him out. I have him in my hand. Drops his tail after the whole spiel of running around and doing all this. He drops his tail in my hand, just sitting there. So 5 more years go by. I don't lose a single tail.
Yeah.
Maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, about a month ago, I started putting some pairs together. I lost about 4 more tails on all lilies. I'm running all lily white pairs this year, man. A couple pairs of super dowels, but all my freaking four lilies, man, all lost their tail. I can't. I'm like dumbfounded. It drives me nuts. I think that super white tail on a lily like really adds to the lizard, man. And I don't do the whole it's just a breeder thing. These are my animals, my pets, my collection, you know what I'm saying, right? They're mine. I love these little things.
And it's an
But
aesthetic thing, right? Just if you like the tail, you like the tail. Like I prefer all my geckos to have tails. Yeah, I lost. I mean, this kind of made me like we talked about like different headspaces, right? And we've had people talk about that on the podcast. But like the Lycodactylus Williams eye, so I'm breeding them. I got a male and a female. They're beautiful. And then like one day, it was like the male was down. He was just dead, and I don't know why. I was feeding him, so I replaced him. And then the problem with these things is like everyone knows day geckos are fast. But the Ligos are like another. They're like it's like the Indy 500 of they're just
I've
like
heard.
they tell. And so I've had a couple get out over the like 3 or 4 years that I've been keeping them, and one got out a few weeks ago, and man, I was raging. I was like, you know what? I am done. I don't want to be stressed every time. Like once again, like my theme is eats Pangea, and or is really enjoyable to keep. It's either very easy or I can have a relationship with them or whatever it is. And so I was like, I don't want to be stressed out. I was stressed. I could feel it in my heart. Every time I was opening the container, like the 12 by 12 by 18, I was stressed out. And then this thing jumps out and I tried to grab it and its tail came off. And then you're going to love this story though, because it has a happy ending. That was January 6th or 7th or something like that. And then a few days go by, and I'm kind of keeping an eye out for it, but I'm not putting in like crazy effort because a lot of things tend to show up on their own if you just like chill. I started seeing him on top of a UVB bar that was over like my Strophurus and some of my frogs. And so I saw him there, and like the first day he just totally got away. And then the second day he was up in a groove in part of the rack. And so I'd put my finger up on the other side and I'd scoot him out and he'd jump. And I would try to have a cup or like pin him to the floor and then just like, and then throw him in a tank. And this happened 2 or 3, 4 or 5 days. And he would always get away. Like he'd land on the wall and then bam, right behind the rack. And it's just the way that my room is set up. You cannot just like, it's not an easy thing.
Imagine. Trust me.
And then I tried to get him in a cup and he kept getting away. And I was like, and then I didn't see him for a whole week. And I was like, dang, now we're getting to the point where usually lizards die because most geckos can live in your room for about 2 weeks. But that's about when the desiccation catches up with them. Yeah. Depending on how your room is set up, you're probably not finding enough bugs to like live for too long. And they're not like a leopard gecko where they store a lot of fat. So like, and then water, the hydration is the big one, right? So we get to 3 full weeks. I'm talking like January 27th.
Was living.
Up in my gecko closet that I have a whole bunch of supplies in. And so, yeah, there was a cricket cup, like it had cricket dust, like the white powder that you calcium dust them. Yep. And it was in the closet and I hear all this rattling. And there's a tailless male LIGO rattling around. And so what had happened is somehow he jumped in the cup, but because there was dust, his feet weren't sticky anymore. And so it was sort of like a pitfall trap that he had fallen into. And I was thrilled because the way that it was set up, I was really surprised he got into it. It was off the wall. He must have jumped off a wall and just random chance he fell in there, and thank God I found him, or he would have like dried up and died.
Yeah.
Threw him in his own little tank. We're nursing him back to health. His tail is coming back. He looked a little thin. He's fat now. He's eating Pangea. He's living the life. And so I'm still stressed because I don't know how I'm going to get him out of this tank that I put him in, and that's going to be a nightmare. But yeah, I'm always really honest with people. Stuff happens, and yeah, it's just like I've had customers buy stuff and then it crashed. But I'm happy to say that most of the time, I mean, not happy to say, but I'm like,
they're the lessons, right? I hate to sound like this or be negative or pessimistic, but without things going wrong, we never get the chance to figure out how to fix them, right? Like you almost need things to go wrong in order to learn. You can't, and then once you learn, you can prevent things from happening, once you've been through it, I guess. I mean, it sucks. And that's what communication, these podcasts are great for too, because if someone's going through a situation that you've been through, they can learn from you, Let's say, okay, well, this is very similar to what happened with Nate. This is what's going on. He did this. I'm going to do this. And it's, we need to share that information in this community. I find a lot of people are, not so willing to share, and it sucks because everyone's little experiences, I mean, they're all lessons that if you put them together, you'd have a book bigger than anyone could write, right? You'd have more pages than you could fit in any bound book if everyone put the lessons they've learned together in this reptile hobby. It's it is what it is, man.
I'm super thrilled. I mean, this sounds like I'm just like feeding your guys' ego, but I've been loving the podcast. I love it, right? Like it's also like you have to think about like it's permanent media, right? So like when I started this, Like, I've only been breeding geckos for like 8 years, which I say only because there's people like Alan Rapashi, Richie, people have been doing this for like a decade, more than a decade, right? And so when I started out, especially when I got into the rare stuff, like rare species, there was like nothing on them. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't find anything, or like I think there was a website called Geckos Unlimited.
There is still, yeah.
Tons of great information, but some of those threads are like super dead, or like the links don't work. And so what's really cool about that, especially with what you guys have been doing with the podcast, is that you have like mostly geckos, which is great because like that's what I specialize in. You know, it's not Nate Skinks, it's Nature Nate geckos. But you have these like experts, these subject matter experts. So like Sarah's, you just did an episode, you know, or like Leeches, you have like Boris on there. The monkey tail anoles. There was only like 3 care guides. And I think maybe he wrote one of them. And that's what got me.
Yeah, he did.
It's just a wealth of knowledge. It's helpful for zoos. A friend of mine, Chris Norman, is one of the only, if not the only, people in the United States that breeds croc tegus. And like zoos are learning from him, right? And so kind of like what you were saying, where like a lot of people, it seems, sorry, I'm just like shifting my foot's asleep. A lot of people, especially in the herping hobby, like if you want to go find snakes or lizards or geckos in the wild, a lot of herp people are super, super gatekeepy about spots. They won't give you any spots. And you're like, look, man, and I get it. To some extent, it kind of makes sense, right? Because like some of them are protected and they don't want you. You know, like, I mean, I've been out with people and they're like, oh yeah, I'm hoping to catch one and like keep it as a pet. I'm like, oh, well, like, yeah, I'm not going to show you my spot because I don't want you.
Yeah, that would make
doing that. It's like, if you want to buy a captive bred, whatever, it's out there. You can go buy it. I don't really want you doing this. But it also sucks because if you're brand new and then no one tells you anything, it's like, okay, but I'm just like, for me personally, when I go out, I'm not collecting. I'm a nature photographer. It just is really fun for me. Like, we're going to do a trip to the Keys in a couple months.
Really? So you'll have fun with that, brother. You'll have some fun. I can't
wait to see. They now have morning geckos in the Keys. So if actually, I thought it would be really funny if I did collect them. I'm not going to do this, but if you did collect them and sell them as like wild type morning geckos to like increase the productivity of your bloodline, would be like super fun. Like, you know, there's 4 types of morning geckos. You would have like a 5th type, and it would be like the Floridian line. This is really funny to me. You know what I mean? Because they're in Hawaii, they're in Japan, they're in the Philippines, and then I don't know where else they are. But I just think that's crazy.
I found New Caledonia. I was on iNaturalist, and I'm looking at all the little pictures that people take at some, and it's not a bovia or however you pronounce it. Just excuse my pronunciation.
You're good.
There was someone took a picture, and it's still on iNaturalist, a picture of a morning gecko in the lodge in New Caledonia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was reading up about them, and apparently they are. Like, they have been documented in New Caledonia, all over Indonesia.
Yeah.
They've made it everywhere, and they're saying it's likely due to cargo transport or something. It makes sense.
Me, right? You have a gecko that eats fruit that looks like a pavia. And then once again, they're small, they're easy to transport, they're easy to evade detection by predators.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm not going to go off on too much of a tangent, but the Florida biology is really interesting because you have day geckos in like the middle of the Keys, and you can find them in Tampa and you can find them in Miami too. But they're really, really like prominent there because day geckos get respiratory issues if they get too cold. So more than other geckos, they can be a little sensitive to temperature. I know at least the Clemmerite, I've seen issues if they get too cold. Yeah. I think it's respiratory, but yeah, the only time I've ever lost a Clemmerite, so my whole house didn't have heat. Everything else was fine. Clemmerite, freaking, like, I lost 1 or 2. But anyway, and then there's tokays, and then there's reef geckos. And what's really interesting is the reef geckos, they're like native to the Keys.
That's what I was reading.
But lately, they're saying that a lot of those actually were probably introduced. And we even have geckos here. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have geckos here, and I'm part of some of the wildlife groups. I'm part of some of the reptile rehoming and like reptile appreciation groups. Pretty much weekly, there's a post of, hey, I found this gecko outside. What is it? Oh, it's a Mediterranean gecko. It's one of those like gray, the typica, or whatever they are. They look like crap. They're really not like a gecko you would want to keep, but it's called a Mediterranean gecko. And what they often do is they're coming in on plants. And then because North Carolina, I'm not going to say it's temperate. People say that, and I think that's crazy. But at the coast, it is temperate. And then in Charlotte and Raleigh, where it freezes pretty hard here, most of them are surviving by being in greenhouses. And so you will see people post pictures of a gecko that looks a lot rougher.
Yeah, look, same thing. I'm on the same page.
Yeah, but there are established geckos, and like scientists know it. They've known for like 20 years, and so they consider them to be introduced but not invasive because they're not actively destroying, at least according to the scientists that are keeping an eye on this. They're not actively destroying or displacing current lizard populations, but they do breed here, which is really interesting. North Carolina has a gecko. You know what I mean? And then it's like Florida, you can find, I think it's almost 12 or 15 species of gecko now are in Florida, mostly in the Keys, the Everglades, and like the southern half.
Aliens too. They've got quite. I see them finding panthers now, bro. Panthers are.
That's nuts. Yeah.
In a way, dude, I'm like,
kind of
it's a super ambiguous thing for me, right? Like,
yeah.
Like I love nature, and I agree with conservation of all sorts. Like I think that that's our duty, to preserve nature. Like I'm such an advocate on letting things live, I guess, and just being. And that's where I have this conflict because I'm like, it's our fault that they're there. I don't care whether it was a plane or whatever the hell they got there. We made the technology that got them there. If it was the pet trade, whatever it was, we did it. They don't necessarily, in my heart tells me that they don't deserve to pay the consequences, right? Like, if they're living and they're thriving, why do you have to be out there killing these fucking things, man? Like, these guys figure something else out, man. Like, you're out here just killing things for fun. They got, it's open season. These guys are making fun and laughing jokes and shooting things out of trees with arrows and stuff. Like, dude, man, like, I'm like so conflicted because again, I understand the natural biology, and Florida is such a unique place that we do have to protect the native natural side of it. But what are iguanas really doing? What are chameleons doing? You guys got the biggest mosquito problem in the world. Like, how many times have presidents and all types of politicians tried to, fill the Everglades? And I mean, like, come on, man. Like,
Well, you'll always have a buddy in me in that kind of thinking, right? I think it's the natural duality and complexity of the issue, right? Because yes, we did introduce them, but at the same time, as you say, right? It's like if you love reptiles, of course it's going to break your heart when something that's huge and charismatic, like an iguana, and then you have people like drowning them, breaking their necks, and you're like, oh. I mean, same with like feral cats, and then there's not a lot of legislation that makes a lot of sense. Like I live in North Carolina, right? And so here, the eastern box turtle is technically
love them.
So people think they're endangered. I don't even want to say this because it you know what I mean? But they're technically not endangered, but by law you can't just go take a ton of them. Mm-hmm. There actually is I'm not going to even say the number, but there is a number that you are allowed to collect with a permit.
Really?
For free. You cannot sell them and you cannot move them across state lines. But I don't even want to say that because then people are going to go do it.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I did. I hate to say it, but I was up in Massachusetts, in Chatham, Massachusetts. Right. And we found one crossing the road. My dad pulled the Jeep over, picked it up. I got 3 younger brothers. He's like, here's your new pet. We had that thing for 16, 17 years. His name was Chatham. We named him after the place we found him. And the older I get, the more, terrible I feel about doing it. But I mean, it's all water under the bridge now. But that's interesting. I also was reading too that they live their whole lives in 1 mile, a mile. Really? Yeah.
There was a guy here in North Carolina that did a study. He had a certain number of acres in a stream, and he would find because all box turtles have their shells are sort of like a tiger or like a fingerprint. Uh-huh. They're very specific to that turtle, and so he would mark the same turtles in pretty much the same hectare spot year after year, and he's been doing this and photographing them for 10 years. So he has a lot of data. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's rough for me. So I always follow the rules, right? But then it's okay, you can't collect, more than 5 natives. And I'm okay, that's the rule. And that's fine until you look across the street and they're clear cutting 100 acres of forest for a new development. And you're okay, cool. But you're definitely killing hundreds of turtles, snakes, anoles.
Oh yeah. All stuff, frogs.
Birds that are going to depend on, so then that's where the disconnect, and I think a lot of people now are really upset because the Everglades are under attack, not only by invasive species, but also by people just clear cutting, new developments. There's no place for the gators to go. Yeah,
super,
there's a
super
natural, and you can
freaking
be
bad.
right. You can enforce the rules and also say, hey, the
Mhm.
government's also just like totally dropping the ball on this, like, native salamander population or overdevelopment. And the same thing with the invasives, right? So I watched this guy. Once again, I try not to like name people. I'll only name people if they want to be named. But there's a great
Yeah.
guy on Instagram that he captures invasives in Florida and then he sells them to the pet trade. And there's a lot of guys who do this. And I enjoy his content. I find it wild. Like he's catching, giant chameleons and night owls and all kinds of stuff. And I understand he's trying to put food on his, this is a
Yeah.
plate for his family and it's a job. But
Mhm.
man, the comments are so negative. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
people
they
who are like,
are. I know exactly what you're talking about. I am hard pressed because I get it. I
yeah,
get it. At least he's not killing them, right? In theory, he's taking them from a stressful natural life where they could
right,
be
right,
prey, they could be whatever, and he's technically putting them in homes where people are going to pamper them. I mean,
right.
but
They,
hey, it's better than him killing them. That's all I can say. It's
well, all the
better than him
comments
out there just killing them for a bounty and
yeah. All the comments are screaming, kill it. It's brutal. Like, they were criticizing him for selling them. They're saying that you should
kill
be
them, kill the animals.
It's actually pretty wild. Yeah, on Instagram, I'll go through his comments, and most people are screaming, like, kill him. This is invasive. And it's like, yes, but it's also an animal, right? It's like feral cats.
Are we
Feral
not
cats,
invasive? Are
huh?
we not invasive?
I mean, depending on who you ask, I'm sure we are. But it's like feral cats, right? I think that's my soapbox. That it's my one opinion that would probably get me in so much trouble. But like feral cats are known to kill 1 billion with a B birds a year in the United States alone.
Yeah.
So like you think about it on a very practical level, should we kill feral cats? Abso-freaking-lutely. Because feral cats, outdoor cats, die twice as fast as indoor cats because they get sick, they get diseases, they get hit by cars, they get eaten by coyotes. And so it's like, okay, if you tell this to a cat owner, they will hate you because like, no, it's cruel to keep it inside. It's like, yes, but it's cruel to let it out. It'll literally live 8 years instead of 16. Like literally, they have proven that.
My cat's never been outside. She's like 3 years old. She's never left the house. She sits in the window and looks at birds, but
And
we
she'll
don't
live
we don't
way
let her out.
longer. But then morally, right? Could you kill a cat? That's pretty rough. I mean, it's a fuzzy, cute. I love animals. So then, morally, right? Like, okay, if we were going to do that, and Australia does that. Australia kills feral cats. It's crazy.
They do damage, bro. They're predators, man. They are straight predators. They wreak havoc, like much more, I would say, than the iguanas or the snakes or the anything.
Right.
I mean, a snake is not. I mean, you're familiar with snakes, dude. They don't gorge themselves. They're not eating all day, every day. They'll knock a bird off or something and they're good for 2 weeks, man. These cats, I have read studies that cats are like one of, if not the only animal, I believe, that kill for fun. Cats will kill for fun. Now, every other animal on the planet kills for food, but other than humans, cats are the only thing to kill for entertainment.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. They get a huge pass. If you talk to a cat owner, they all have a story of like, oh yeah, it like killed a baby bunny, it killed a lizard, and like put it at my, like they all have these stories. And I'm not saying we should kill cats. I couldn't do it personally. That's brutal. Yeah. What I am saying is we should make outdoor cats illegal. If you're going to go after the invasives or you're going to go after the pet trade in Florida and you're going to say you can't have exotic animals, you absolutely should have to have a permit for a cat. It should have to stay indoors. Like, I'm just saying when you're talking about like equivalency, right? And it's kind of like the same thing you're saying of like, and then part of me is actually kind of stoked. So like when I go to Florida, half the fun is seeing curly-tailed lizards. It's seeing anoles, like crested anoles, night anoles. Yeah. And you're seeing the Spider-Man agamas. I mean, these are things that are clearly introduced. Yeah. Butterfly agamas. I don't love that they're there from like an ecological perspective. But as a reptile enthusiast who's probably never going to have enough money to go to Africa, seeing a Spider-Man agama running across a Walmart parking lot.
Cool as hell, right?
Dope. It's really dope.
It's like a sci-fi movie or something. Like you're in a different place. It's like, I don't know how to explain it because I've seen them. I've been there. And it's like you're
right.
If you're into animals, you'll get a feeling that's just super unique, like you're where they're from, but you're not. They're where you are. It's like this it's just it's a blast, man. And that's what I'm saying. I would hate to see that go. I mean, it's not for nothing. If you took humans out of the mix, maybe these animals wouldn't necessarily be here in the abundance that they are. But even like you said before, with storms and
Right.
those big things that form on the ocean, trees and debris, and they transport, they move around from. Who's to say that over time these animals wouldn't have gotten there, right?
Oh, yeah,
and if they're living, so be it. This is now their natural environment. They're not going to make it up to the Carolinas. They're not making it up to Mass.
Right.
Climate is going to keep them in an isolated area. Nature is doing what it needs to do. You don't need to be out there killing them. Nature will handle it. They can't just go anywhere they want to.
Well, for a long time, certain tropical beetles were technically illegal in the United States. A lot of people had them. I'm talking about things like Goliath beetles, flower beetles.
Like rhinoceros beetles?
Yes, and certain
dung beetles and stuff.
Yeah, and so it's kind of funny that it was like they were so aggressive about, and people had them anyway. I don't know. But then
I know quite a few people that do.
Yeah, but you would think about from like a logical perspective. The larvae eat decaying wood, so there's really no threat to like the environment. And then of course they're from Africa, right? So if they're living anywhere other than like San Diego, parts of Texas and parts of Florida, they will die in the winter. And like they also take a year or two to reproduce. They're never going to become like a roach where you have like a million of them, right? Like we're not going to have giant, Goliath beetles taking over Texas, as dope as that would be. And that's my dream, but it will never happen, right? So then once again, so what's really interesting is the reef gecko I was telling you about. Mm-hmm. They're almost positive, and this recently came out. They're almost positive now that the Keys reef geckos and these are the Spherodactylus. So there's kind of like wonky, like the very round eye. They're very small. I wouldn't keep them because they're too small. They're almost positive that those actually were probably introduced from the Bahamas or from Cuba or from wherever naturally. But what's really interesting is like, okay, so you have an introduced species, right? It's not native. But some of them are protected by Florida state law as a protected species because there's not very many of them. Mm. And so it's kind of funny because it's not an invasive species because it's a very tiny gecko. What's it going to do? It's not going to destroy anything. And maybe it doesn't compete with anything else that's endangered. But they're actually protected. Like if you went down to the Keys and you tried to collect them and sell them, the government would get mad at you or whatever. And that's one that's really interesting because now you're protecting an animal that is not native. Right? Yeah. And then that just it's a crazy sentence. And that's the reality that people in Florida are seeing, right? And then,
well, I respect it in all honesty because that is something that had no real, potentially had no real human influence, right? If there was some type of debris that they came right over for, I mean, that's that's nature. That would have happened without us or with us,
Right.
So how do you determine it's not native when it is? I mean, it's kind of like us, like all of our ancestors come from different continents and whatnot. We all came here. This is our home now, right? This is our homeland. You are an American. So if these things came over, they reproduced, they got babies, they're native. It sounds ridiculously stupid and simple-minded, but fuck, they are.
If I could have I think a lot about like if I could do everything over again, if I could have a second career, I probably would actually really like to do like wildlife, maybe not like enforcement, but sort of like wildlife legislation of just like, I think a lot of times they just need someone in the room that like does the hobby. So like that
knows what they're talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
This guy got bit in South Carolina and now South Carolina is at risk of losing venomous, which is crazy because forever South Carolina was like the Wild West of like, you can keep anything here, like kangaroos, go crazy, Gila monsters, venomous snakes. And so once again, it's like, it would be kind of nice to have more representatives in the room that, because the average person in Congress does not keep reptiles, right? And so one of us could go up there and be like, look, this guy doesn't represent us. These things are going to happen. He had a video of him doing crazy stuff. We don't endorse it.
The taipan?
Yeah, the inland taipan. I'm trying not to say his name, but you know what I'm saying, right? So like they have a representative, and I think that's the other thing that I don't like about this hobby is that everything seems so like people want everything to be binary, black and white. And it's okay to have a nuance. You can not like that there's pythons in the Everglades and at the same time feel bad for them when they're killed because it's a big, beautiful snake. If you didn't feel bad, you probably wouldn't like reptiles. You know what I mean? Like if someone killed a ball python in front of me, I'd be very upset. And it's the same thing. It's like, should it be living in Chicago on the street? Probably not. But you killing it makes me bummed. So that's why I like these guys in Florida that are selling them. And they only sell them in the pet trade to states that are northern. Like New York. Like a chameleon is not going to survive a New York winter, for sure. It's not going to
It's
get enough
also it's
hydration.
responsible. I respect it. Again, like I said, I absolutely respect it. It's
Right.
they're not killing them. They're not killing them. And being that they are invasive,
Right.
listen, if you can feed your children by collecting some of those things and putting them into the hobby, and again, that's kind of cool because we get the chance to, I don't know how you would really classify that as far as new, but it is still new blood into, you're diversifying bloodlines in the hobby with certain animals. People working with the nightingales, the chameleons, the agamas,
Right.
There's, I mean, it is, would it be wild? Do you consider it wild if it's invasive? Is it still wild?
Well, it's funny. It's funny too because like a lot of Florida keepers are keeping so many things that are from Cuba or from Central America outside, right? So we're talking about like redfoot tortoises and nightingales and all of the crown giant anoles, and a lot of people keep them outside. And so you think about it, it's like, okay, well, if you're even me here in North Carolina, I'm working on some outdoor enclosures for like I have a redfoot tortoise and I have a banana pectinata and some nightingales.
Pectinatas, they're gone up and coming species, brother.
We could talk about that. But outdoors, it's hot and it's humid here. It's the perfect climate, and I can get away with it from like April to like October, like almost all of the year, like 2/3 of the year. It's hot and humid as all get out. It's raining, so I really want to do it. But immediately I'm thinking like, okay, now this is not just a captive bred animal. It is being exposed. Like there's anoles that live here, right? So it's like, okay, you are exposing it to potentially parasites, to whatever. It may still be captive bred in the sense that you bred it in a box, right? Like the people in Florida that do it year round. But it is something to think about when you're bringing something into your collection. It's like, okay, it's captive bred, but it was exposed. Like, does it have parasites? Absolutely. It's something. Probably. It may not, but it might. And so that's something to think about.
To a degree, a lot of these things do. I mean, that's a topic. Yes. We can go on for hours about that, but I mean, I'm big into human fitness and nutrition and stuff, and I believe that parasites, to a degree, and all of these animals are very natural. It's bacterias. They have systems, and their immune systems combat certain things, and it's. I mean, animals have died. I know of people that have killed animals by like deworming them, giving them panicure and stuff. They've killed the animal by, I'm figuring, killing off too much good bacterias and whatever else is going on in their body that's killing these parasites.
No, absolutely. Well, people are starting to come around to this now in podcasts and other things. I heard someone say it on one of your podcasts, right? But a lot of people will bring in wild caught stuff and immediately panicure. It's like, no, immediately hydration. Get it stable, get it eating, and then after a couple months, once you know that it's stable,
a healthy animal will fight
some level of a panicure, some level of, whatever antibiotic you're using. Even people, I have a good buddy of mine, and he's really gone through the ringer because of antibiotics. If you overuse them or they're overprescribed, it can kill your natural gut flora. And then you have bad bacteria come in and colonize, and like even my friends who like haven't really had like the worst time, the week that they were on antibiotics, their digestive system was all like messed up, right? And so there is a cost trade-off. And so once again, if you have an animal that's like not putting on weight, okay, yeah, it's probably a good candidate to use some dewormer. But once again, after it's been established, this thing has been on a plane or in a box for like months. Don't just give it a high dose of honestly painful chemicals, right? And it's cool to see people are coming around to that. I do want to go back really quick. I was correct. I looked this up. The first Bovia species was described in 1872, and it was Bovia cyclura, which is the other one that people have. That's like the fourth one. They stay smaller. And then like literally like 30 of them were described in 2022. So just a couple years. But what?
Do you have the Bovias? That's what I was going to ask. Do you have any intentions on getting all that you can, all in the hobby? Or
I could have like 5 of them. I think for me, once again, it's kind of like the LIGO story that I told you, where like they can be very fast. And so with the big ones, it's not so much of a big deal because you can only be so fast when you're that big. Yeah. But the smaller ones, I didn't want to keep. I didn't want to have tons of tanks of things that are like morning geckos, where I get a little frustrated if one like darts out and it's hard to catch. And like,
are they all flighty? I mean, maybe some species are like the Uris. My Uri doesn't. She doesn't try to go anywhere, But
that's because their tails are too long. It holds. They slide.
Imagine
They're
so.
all pretty dang quick. It's like any
Yeah.
small skink species.
They're gecko-ish, very, very
It's
morning gecko-ish, day gecko-ish.
it's a survival strategy,
Yeah.
right? It's like you literally cannot
Yeah.
catch me. Whereas like a bigger
Yeah.
animal could hold its ground sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and so they can be bigger, right? Like you notice like the Equestrius podior, the blue beauty anoles, they're mean as hell. They puff up, they get their
Yeah.
dewlap, and they will actively try to bite me. But once
Yeah.
again, you're talking about a lizard that's like 12 inches long, right? It has some size to it. So like if a bird wanted to, mess with it, or like a praying mantis, right, is like one of the biggest bugs. So it's reaching a level where it can actually kind of start to be like, actually, I'm going to evaluate you and see if I can take you on and intimidate you off. And I wanted to mention something else too. There's two other geni. One's called panny gecko. Nobody has ever heard of that. Panny gecko, I'm not even sure anyone keeps it. It's PANIEGEKKO. So kind of like Pangea, like panny. And so that used to be a Bavia species. And I think they moved into its own. You honestly cannot even find like pictures of these things on Google. And then the other one is Diero gecko, which I mentioned. And so Diero gecko look a lot like the Bavia, and they're very closely related, but they tend to not have the banding pattern, sort of like a Chihuahua. They have, it's almost like stripes, and they're kind of a bronze color. And I'll show you.
From New Caledonia?
Yep, it's actually really funny. When you Google it, you get a picture of a Yuri. That is absolutely a Yuri.
That's not it. I was going to say, that's not it.
This is a Diero gecko, and I breed these too. I have Diero gecko nuhoensis. And so they kind of have like a stripe.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see them on the flowers because they also eat Pangea. They're also sexual in nature as opposed to
How many of those do you have? You have a little, same thing, just a pair?
As far as I know, there's only like 2 or 3 of us that really keep these. And then
Yeah, the only one I know.
The babies are friggin' morning gecko sized and they stress me out. And so that's the big thing, right? When you talk about breeding, Robusta, morning geckos, Diero gecko, anything that's really small, right?
Those Dieros, do they bury their eggs?
Yes, they do. And so this is a Diero. Full size is the same size as a morning gecko. They're not bigger than a morning gecko. They do seem, these ones, at least in my experience, tend to be under stuff. So actually, they seem very low in the tank. So I have a lot of like cork cover and little tubes on the ground, but they also bury. And then the incubation is actually the same as like a new cow, which is great.
I'd imagine.
But when you are raising the babies, I buy these very small glass. They're actually, I think they're like a half gallon. You can buy them on Chewy, not a sponsor, but you can buy them on Chewy.com. They're like half glass and they're screen tops. And so what I've been doing for a lot of my tiny geckos that are very prone to drying out or whatever is I set them up as like a very small bioactive. So you have like cocoa fiber, Reptisoil, whatever you want, and then cocoa chips. And so what that does is you have like a gradient where like the bottom can be moist and wet, but then the chips are always going to dry out because they're on top. And then you have a couple branches, and then I put the Pangea in there, and then I use egg tubes. And so this is actually a little controversial. I keep the juvenile Bavia robusta, the Diero gecko, and sometimes even baby morning gecko tubes if I have a whole bunch of eggs. And I'll put them all in there together. So they incubate, and then they all are just
damn cool, man.
Yes.
I think that's awesome.
Very tiny, almost like a fish tank. It's like a little world of like 2 or 3 different species. And I do that just for my own sanity. I don't want to have 9 of these things and each one has a tiny baby. And then once the Robusta actually very quickly become a manageable size where you can grab them and you can put them into like a critter keeper or a tub or something a little bit more sane. And so once they get to that size and they start to kind of bully everything else, then I'm like, okay, you're done. But yeah, I keep all of my baby morning geckos.
So cool, man. I've always wanted to, and it is again controversial, but I've always wanted to build like a giant tank, like 125, something crazy, and put a few species in there, man. Like these things live on the island together, they revolve together. Like they'll figure it out, right? As long as you're not big enough to eat this one. But I mean, why couldn't I keep a gargoyle, a crested gecko, and a chihuahua all in the same giant planted enclosure, right? They all occupy different areas, I guess, right? Different heights, different parts of the forest. If the enclosure was big enough, I just think it's one of those things, like we were saying before, that's like an unsaid rule. Like you do not mix species. I don't think I know anybody other than maybe Bill Strand has a tank where he has a chameleon, a frog, and a gecko all in the same enclosure. And I think that's awesome.
Well, you know why you don't know is because no one talks about it. It's like hybrids. It's like frowned upon. I promise you, there are many people who do it. I have a couple friends who have amazing multi-species tanks. Like we're talking like a nidinal with like a basilisk, or
that's
like
awesome.
And it actually inspired me to do the same. And so I have one multi-species tank that has been incredibly successful. It's 2 pink tongue skinks. It's a breeding pair. So they occupy the lower levels for the most part. It's bioactive, it's planted. I have a mop head iguana, captive bred. Those things are cool. I have a Sabanis, Anolis sabanis. It's the Dalmatian anole.
Okay.
And I had the LIGO in there. It was an extra male, so he wasn't breeding with anyone. And I have baby day geckos. I raised them up in there as a nursery. And sometimes if they're like large enough, I can move them. Right? Because once again, you want them to have access to Pangea. So a lot of these animals are eating Pangea, but they're also eating the crickets, but they're also eating the dog food or cat food that the skinks will eat. And so and it's super bioactive. The springtails are crazy in there. And so for me, that's like a really good way of like, okay, it already has heat, it already has UVB. And once again, the geckos are not fighting because the day geckos only become mean when they're adults. So they're up at the very top. The anole and the mop head are on branches, but they're different size and they're not aggressive. And then the skinks are on the bottom layer. Now, this is not something I would like, I'm telling the podcast it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah, we're not suggesting anybody does this.
Right.
Nate is an extremely experienced keeper. He's done this for a very long time. Don't go just putting animals together. We're just talking.
And it's just for me, right? Like that's usually like I'll put a holdback day gecko in there. These are not the ones that I'm like, if I want to sell something, then it's not going to go in there, right? It's going to have its own tub, and I'm going to monitor it. Blah blah blah.
How many species? Let's talk about that for a second. I know you said you have to go 8 o'clock, dude. I could talk to you for hours.
I'd say for a little bit longer.
How many species do you bring to a show when you go vend? Are you producing enough bovia to sell yet? Are you selling and producing bovias?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a great question. And there's definitely people who keep them. I knew a guy in Washington that had like no social media presence, and that's where I got some of my first animals from. Yeah, so when I go to a show, one of the things that really differentiates my table is the variety. If people come to my table, they're always like, what is that? It's almost annoying sometimes. Like I brought a pair of Gigi skinks and instantly regretted it because every single person was like, what is that? Is it a pine cone? And I'm like, okay, it's kind of fun for the first few and you can share your excitement. But after like 100 and like maybe, you're kind of hoping to sell them and they're still there, then you're kind of like, okay, this is kind of getting like really annoying. But at every show, I'll have at least one of every new cow that's commonly kept. So I'll have some Chihuahua, some Sarahs, Furies, some Gargs, a whole bunch of Cresties. And then like I'll usually have like a keel-bellied lizard or some sort of lacertid. I'll have a couple species of skinks. I'll have assassin bugs. I'll have beetles. I'll have mantises. I'll have roaches. And then sometimes just like random crap. Like I breed flying geckos, so sometimes those will be on the table. Fish scale geckos. And yes, I bring the Bavia. And
dude, that is bad.
The Bavia people think it's a giant mourning gecko. They're like, what is this? Is this a mourning gecko? And then you kind of go through like the education process of like, no, actually, this is a gecko that almost nobody keeps, and this is how, and I have customers that have bought Bavia from me, and so I assume at some point I'll have like friendly competition, but they live in like other states. But I usually bring one to a show. And I'm actually about to list a Bavia that I produced unsexed and a Diero gecko. So last year was my first year breeding both of them regularly.
Awesome. That's exciting, man. Someone listen, guys, check Nate's page out, follow him.
Nature Nate.
You're getting an opportunity to get animals that nobody has. Like you have an in right now and an opportunity. How do you say it? The D one?
Diero gecko.
Diero. So you guys have an opportunity to get geckos that literally a handful of people are working with in the States, man. Like, hop on it. He said he's going to list them.
Yep. Yeah, they're going to go in more.
Follow them, check them out.
I used to use fauna classifieds. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And then something with their website last year, and I kind of just never made it back. So now everything's on Morph Market, and like that's been fun. And then shows and local, and then Instagram is like super fun. And actually,
I didn't. That's where do you make a lot of sales on Instagram? You have a big Instagram presence. It's like you have a lot of followers. You have a very personable. You have it. Yeah. You have it.
It's a complicated answer because we have 12,500 followers, which is not insignificant.
Badass. Awesome.
Instagram wants you to pay for reach, so they don't always show my content to even remotely like a third. Like if you have more than 10,000 followers on Instagram, they give you analytics. And so when I post something, I can see how many people saw the post. how many of them were followers, how many of them were not followers. And it's like abysmal. It's like 2,000 or 3,000. And so I don't really want to pay for reach. I just would prefer the Instagram show the 12,000 people that follow me, my content, and then I would get like a lot more likes and engagement and whatever. I don't know if I care anymore, but yes, I do a good amount of business. Like if you want to get a hold of me, the fastest way is Instagram. I have it on my computer. I have it on my phone. Morph Market is good. Facebook is like another, but that's like more like personal use. And then a big thing I really want to do this year is actually sort of like Clint's Reptiles, where they do like, these are the top 15 pets that no one knows about, but they're phenomenal. And like Frank Payne has done like a really good job.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the animals that he works with, and like this is why I keep them. They're very enjoyable. Yeah. And so I'll do something that's kind of a hybrid of that this year on YouTube.
What you're doing. I mean, that's exactly how I view you. You want, you have these unique animals that you work with, but you also have these standards that are obviously like transferable to the people that buy them. Easily kept, personable, reasonably priced animal. Like I get it. I get it. I can't even really articulate what I see you're doing, but that's awesome.
Thanks.
So you're going to do a recording, like a YouTube?
Yeah.
How are you going to do this?
Yeah, I'm not very good. I've had a YouTube channel for a while, and I even have like 1 or 2 really silly videos that actually kind of did really well. I have one of like a silk moth like winking with its antenna. But I don't know how to edit. I'm no good at editing. I can't, drop in all these graphics. So they're going to be, and a lot of people have done this. So they're basically going to be like one shots. Clint does a lot of like, there's a lot of like good editing, but basically it'll be me in front of a bioactive tank with the animal. I'm going to hold it and I'll have its tank. And then there's going to be a one shot. So one take, they're going to be like 10 minutes long at the most. And then it's just me geeking out about, and I kind of have already, I have like the top, it'll basically be called like Nate's top 15 best pets that you don't know about. And so it'll be like,
I'm excited to watch this, dude. I want to see it.
Almost all of them will eat Pangea. So it's like human false chameleons. It'll be some of the crown giant anoles that are really fun to keep. Garter snakes will be on there. Because I do work with snakes now, and a lot of people don't know that. And then what else will it have? It'll have like 6 different skink species for sure. And then it'll have a wide variety. It'll have Uris will be like a big focus. Chihuahua will be a big focus. And so, yeah, the theme will just be like most enjoyable pets. Because I really do think that if you don't enjoy it, and you're going to spend all this time and all this money, and like, I've got a full-time job and a side hustle, and I'm, I try to work out when I can, and I'm married. It's like, okay, I don't have like too much.
Trust me, bro, I'm in the same boat.
So it's, if you're going to do this, you really have to have a passion. And for me, if an animal is really skittish and I never see it, and it costs, I need UVB and heat and bugs, and that's all it'll eat, and I can never hold it, I start to get to a point of like, it's actually almost like irritation of like, okay, this is not only costing me time and money, but then there's also no enjoyment. Fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's just, and it happens to people, you don't like something, you don't really, you're taking care of it because it's the responsible thing to do, but it's not a pleasure. I think if you got more than 10, 15 animals, we've all experienced that. We bought something that we were excited about that we soon realized is not bringing us the joy that other things do. I mean, I think it's super common. I think people just don't talk about it much, but I think that happens a lot more than people will admit.
Yeah, so I've sold some of the rare geckos that I used to keep, like the what's the St. Martin's giant gecko with the spots? Those are cool. That is it? Oh, it's so long. It's like Thecodactylus oscabaccaronium. It's like the longest.
Exactly. Didn't you have Madagascan velvet geckos too?
I've never worked with those, actually.
Really? I thought you had them. Somebody was buying some.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I do. Sorry. I do. I have those. I'm breeding them. The common name is a disaster because velvet gecko can mean like 4 different species. There's Australian velvet. Sorry, I got confused.
The Tanzania ones.
Yeah, actually, Jason's getting a proven pair of the Sakalava from me, and they're freaking dope. They eat Pangea.
They're a cool-ass gecko.
Always out. They love to bask, but they're active at night. And they're one of those geckos where if you put in the Pangea, because like I work with a lot of animals that eat Pangea, but I try not to feed Pangea unless they actively eat it. So it's like an animal that like will eat Pangea. Like an anole. I'm not going to be making Pangea every week for an adult unless I'm going to watch it eat the Pangea. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's just a waste of time, money, and energy. But the Blazodactylists are on that food bowl within a minute or two. Even if it's the middle of the day, they will be at the bowl and they will like clear it. And I love that. Because once again, it's the interaction. It's like a tortoise.
Yeah.
You throw in the greens and they come running. And I love that.
You know, people don't admit that enough either, Nate. Like, when I was a kid, I've kept reptiles my whole life. I'm 41 years old. I was born into a family that had reptiles when I was born. We had a tank on our coffee table in the living room, dude. No exaggeration. My right hand to God, dude. A glass fish tank on the coffee table with a dwarf caiman in it. Like, as a child, had a dwarf caiman, as a coffee table. Like I could tell you stories you just, they're not even believable, so I don't even tell people. But my point is that when I was a kid, I used to buy animals and get animals because of what they ate and how they ate, right? Does that make any sense to you?
Okay.
Like, I would buy something because watching it eat was awesome. And this animal ate this way and ate this, and that was awesome. That eating process is like a big factor in why a lot of people, especially me, a lot of people keep animals, right? You want to see the damn things you eat, whether it's Pangea, crickets, mice. I mean, you want to see them eat, man. That's half of the, you know, that's like one of the coolest things about keeping certain species, in my opinion.
Well, it's one of the only times they really do anything right. Like, a lot of
Absolutely
kind of just sit there and they've asked and they're cool to look at, but like, that's not that exciting. And so for me, that's really what got me into like skinks. Was like, I can tongue feed just about every skink I own.
Yeah, they're super personable, man.
Almost all of them will eat Pangea as a treat, and they enjoy it. And I know that they're getting calcium and sugar and protein in it, which is great. Yeah, and so I've moved a lot of my collection over the years into more things that I can tongue feed too. So I have like a trio of like skinks, and they go nuts, like the emerald tree skinks, and so you get that relationship, and it's so much more rewarding.
Those are really cool. How do you like working with those? The emerald tree skinks? I hear like people they'll walk right out onto your hand from the cage, like they're just.
I try not to do it because it makes me too nervous that they're gonna get. If something gets loose in my room, it's really hard to get it again because of the way that the rack system is, and it's on carpet, which don't get me going. There is I don't really want to move. I put a lot of effort into things, but I've moved a lot over the past few years just for like work and whatever.
Yeah.
The ideal reptile room, I'm telling you, is not carpet. You spill that Pangea, oh, it's a really, really bad day, especially on carpet. You're like, how do I walk?
The Madagascan velvet geckos. Are you selling something that you produced, or are you selling your collection of them?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Are you getting out of them?
Not fully, but he is getting like my pair that I've produced quite a few animals from. Yeah, which is crazy, but I'm stoked because they're going to do really well in his climate.
Yeah, he'll do good with them. Jason's like very meticulous with keeping his animals.
Yeah, you think I'd be like really sad about it, right? Because not a lot of people breed them. But once again, it's part of just the journey that I'm on right now. It's like, okay, I have all these things, and like they do produce for me, and I've enjoyed them. I'm kind of ready for a new challenge, and then once again, it's like once these are gone, that's a 30-gallon tank that I'm going to have that's open, and it's planted, and it's bioactive.
Do you have any plans?
Well, if things go well with the tree skinks, then that's probably grow out tank or something else. Yeah, so it's just kind of like, I mean, I'm pretty ADD, so it's like, I try to be responsible, but when my heart is like moving in another direction, then a lot of times I'll slowly move something else out that is like, okay, I've done this and I feel really good about this and it's gonna go. And that's been really cool. Like I'm also moving my Haemophilus walbergi, which is like an African velvet gecko.
Black and white ones? The ones from Tanzania?
Yep.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's super cool. The incubation is a nightmare. I mean, it's like 130 days and like
I hear.
Keep it kind of warm, dry, but not too dry. And like to me, it's like once again we're bordering on like the level of irritation of like I have this
system you got going on. It doesn't fit the flow. I get it. Trust me. I can relate. Let's say that. When something takes something, I control the climate of my room. I control the ambient. So everything I keep needs to fit this, right? If something, there's a lot of animals I want and I would have, but they don't fit what I'm doing. So I just really I can't. It would be too hard for me to take this environment that I've created and create a different one in the same room. I don't have multiple rooms, so it's super understandable. I think a lot of people have problems for that reason. They try to keep animals from, 10
yeah.
different places all in one area, and you got a jungle setup right next to a desert setup, and you want to know why shit's going wrong. It's obvious to me, but
Well,
it's
it's
we
hard
could
to
go on
believe
about that for another podcast.
when
What
you.
was that?
Oh, just I was gonna say, like, I really like salamanders, and I used to keep some, but I had to keep them downstairs in a closet, and like I really had to keep an eye on, like, because if you take a salamander much above 73, they start spazzing out pretty bad.
Yeah.
Some of them really bad, and so that was one too where I kind of had to be like, okay, my wife wants this closet back, and like I can't, I could not keep them upstairs. I saw them spazzing out even in like winter. The upstairs would get up to like, because it's North Carolina, the sun is strong even in the winter.
Yeah.
It'll get up to 80 degrees up here. It did the other day, and I was like, oh crap, I actually have to turn on the AC. It was hitting 83 upstairs.
Wow.
I was like, dang. So like that's one too, and then I moved them, right? And so sometimes, yeah, it's just like, this is what's working for me right now.
The animal too. It's better for the animal to get the
Mhm.
animal to a place
Yeah.
where it's not a inconvenience to someone, where it's easier for them to keep it, like my buddy Matt keeps salamanders too, and he's got a whole designated area of his
Yeah.
house to these things, and he keeps all of his Australian geckos upstairs in another room, and it's like it's a you can't. Yeah, I get it, but it's commendable. It's a noble thing to do. You've
Yeah.
accepted what you're doing, and you have a system. You need to do what's best for you, and what's best for you is ultimately what's best for your animals, right? If you're not in the
Yeah.
right place mentally, and an animal doesn't fit the flow of your
Right.
system you have, because we all have a system when we have this many animals, when it comes to feeding and cleaning and everything else. It's I get it.
And it's
So
one of the things. Oh, sorry, go for it.
I'm giving you one. I know we're coming up. I know you have to leave, and it's like breaking my heart that I'm
Another
keeping
10
you past 8 o'clock, dude. But whenever you're done, just like I gotta go.
I will. I'll let you know.
Totally
It's coming up. I got like another 10. I was just going to say too, just like a lot of us in this hobby, and one of the really cool things about this hobby is like, I think a lot of us do have ADHD.
I
And so
definitely do.
we're like following sometimes shifting passions, right? And so what I think is really important, right, is you absolutely have to be passionate, because I know that pretty much every single one of us that has any sort of collection has experienced burnout, where you just don't want to water, you're not feeling it. And so if you're not passionate, then your animal care is going to get sloppy and like whatever. And so like for me too, it's just like I really want to hop into the room and just be so jazzed about everything that's there. And that has been huge. I've started doing that a year and a half ago, where like, okay, I've looked at my collection, I saw a lot of lone male geckos, and I had them to collect them because I thought it was cool that they ate Pangea, but I wasn't breeding them, so like didn't really make like a ton of sense, like not only from like a business perspective, but also just kind of like, okay, this is a rare gecko, like it should be bred. Like ethically, I would actually like to move it out to someone else because I want them to breed it. I'm not going to do it. Like when I had a rough snout, it was very expensive, but I sold it for more than I paid, and it went to someone who had a female, right? I don't want to just hold up. And so it's kind of the same thing with like the Blacidactylus. I enjoyed them. I bred them. I sold them. But right now, my passion is just like, I want that tank, and I want to work on something that's like a little bit more. Like the Blacidactylus are hard for me to tongue feed. They've done it, but they're a gecko. They're gonna scoop. And so right now, I'm more focused on breeding Lacertids, like keel-bellied lizards, and like that would be a really good fit for that tank. Or the emerald tree skinks, which are super popular and they're amazing. And so like that's kind of the stuff where I'm like, okay, this would actually make like way more sense for me right now. And once again, it's like, this isn't a flip. It's not like I bought them and like a month later I was like, oh, I'm bored. It's like, no, I've kept them for years.
You're doing super responsible. That's like,
right.
Again, super commendable, man. Super noble to have something that should be worked with, but you're not going to, so you get it in the hands of someone that is. Awesome. Yeah. Recognizing that something's not fitting your goals, awesome. You have to do that. We have to make adjustments, and you're building a brand. You're building a business. I love what you're doing, to be honest, with the variety you have and the way you're setting yourself up with your collection. I mean, that's super cool. Very.
One right here are Aussie tree skinks. So I know you had a really great episode the other day about the Erginia, what is it? The Gidgies. What is their last? Oh, Stokeside.
Yep.
And then there's also I have a Cunningham, and I kind of fell in love with that whole complex. I don't have Depressa because they're depressingly expensive, but these are, a lot of people don't keep these. These are Agurnia striolata, and they're like emerald tree skinks, but they're from Australia, and they're gray. They're two-toned. They're
Really?
like white belly, a black stripe across the eye, and then they're gray on the top. But they eat Pangea, wet dog food, any bug you give them, and they live in tree crevices. They call them the tree crevice skink. So that's another one too, where like, okay, I've clearly fallen in love with skinks. So every spare 30-gallon tank that I can have right now, I kind of want to devote that to the skinks, because they know me. They come down when I enter the room. I'm tongue feeding them, or I'll just give them the whole bucket and they just dive head first into it. It's pretty funny. I'll post some videos.
They're a cool animal. They make great pets. You know, you doing what you're doing is ultimately giving them exposure. You're exposing these super cool animals to the hobby. You know, you have your following, you're doing your shows, you're getting animals out there. And I know it's controversial, but I feel like the more people that know about them, the more people keep them, the better off it is for the animals in the long run, right? I mean, it's super cool, man. And they deserve it too, man. Some of these skinks I see, and I don't keep them myself because for obvious situations, but I look at them and I'm like, man, how are these things not more popular? Like, these are awesome freaking animals, man. Like, super intelligent too. Science is like literally, you know, they study a lot of skinks. Skink intelligence. Like, skinks are smart, man. They're not like stupid, simple-minded animals. Like, skinks are like skinks are smart.
Yeah, they're crazy smart. I mean, and they're really bold. I've had wild, you know, like out here we have a broad-headed skink. You probably have them too up there. Yeah. And there's ones in my yard that if I work with them and I'm patient, they'll climb up my arm to get like a cricket. Like, you could feel a wild skink. Yep. You know, it's sort of like some of these curly-tailed lizards. They have a boldness that I think is like really. But yeah, if you know, that's my whole thing. So yeah, most shows I have like 20 different species minimum, and I really appreciate.
Are you selling skinks at the shows? You bringing them?
Yeah. And I'm always very transparent. Some are produced by me, and then I also every year will take a group of wild caughts, and they go in the quarantine room, and I take care of them, I treat them, and then I provide them as a service, basically. So it's like, I took the risk. I brought in 7 Schneider skinks. I hope that they all live. If they die, I'm just out whatever I paid. But then I'll make some of them available as sort of like longer term care. And then usually in the listing, I'll say, look, this is wild caught, but I've had it for a year and it's doing really well. And so once again, that's one where like, if I can help someone who's new in the hobby not get an animal that's literally fresh off the boat from Africa, it's been established, I've done fecals or I've looked at it and it seems very healthy, then at least you know, like, okay, your chances of this thing dropping dead tomorrow are extremely low, almost as low as a captive bred individual, other than you don't know its age. So and that's something I do. And so I will occasionally get wild caught stuff, but it's going to be on the listing. It's very transparent. And then once again, it's a lot cheaper than, it'll be more than fresh import prices, but less than captive bred.
Which is rightfully so. Right. You took the risk, like you said. You got them established. You got them, you know, and that's.
And I'm not just doing it for fun, right? I'm holding back what I think are going to be the best breeders. So if I get 7 of them and I can clearly tell there's a trio, like I usually will hold that back for my own projects, and then whatever's left over.
Have you gotten any wild caught females in that were gravid and laid eggs for you?
Yes. I'm trying to think of if any of them were like noteworthy though. I've had stuff happen. Sometimes by accident, and sometimes like nothing worth really talking about. But yeah, I've had that happen before, and it's kind of fun. But then it's it's captive born. So. Like, to me, there's a lot of value in captive born, even though people might not agree with me on this. But it's like, okay, from like a parasite perspective, from a scarring perspective, captive born is still pretty great because it wasn't exposed to all, like I said, all the parasites of the outside world. And it also didn't go through whatever scarring from like bird strikes and other predators.
But it has those strong natural genes, you know, that's nature's, you know, only, you know, the survival of the fittest, if you will, that the parent of that animal is a percentage of animals that made it through freaking hell. Like that animal, that's good blood. The way I see it, you know.
But yeah, nothing that's worth like mentioning. This was more like when I was a kid and you'd get like a wild lizard or like a garter and it produces in captivity for you. And it's like, okay, technically these are captive born, but I did nothing. And I think it's a gray area right? It's like the monkey-tailed skinks when they say that they're like farm produced, and you're like, I mean, you totally just So I think there's like a gray area, and once again, if I sell something that's captive born, I'm also very transparent of like, okay, this thing I got it in and it immediately laid eggs. It's like, did I breed it? I'm not going to say that I bred it. I will say that it's captive born and like produced by me, maybe. And once again, I think there's a distinction on Morph Market that you can put captive born, not captive born and bred. And so I always make that distinction too. If it happens, awesome. Honestly, a lot of times I just keep those as future breeders.
I would.
Because they're very solid animals, right? They didn't have to go through a nasty importation, hot, cramped boat in a crate with no water. So yeah, it's happened. But once again, it's not something I'm going to brag about.
Random question, but when you bring the skinks to the show, how do you put them on display? Do you, like you would put a gecko in a deli cup, I guess. Do you just do those big 12-inch round ones? How do you display them at the shows?
So I'll have big deli cups, and then you keep them on mulch instead of paper towel. So like the skinks will totally just like bunch up the paper towel pretty bad. So I try to keep them on mulch, and that allows you to see the color of the skink.
Yeah.
But also give them, because they don't have sticky pads, so it gives them the kind of like stability to like feel like there's ground underneath them.
Yeah.
But they're pretty funny.
Do they get a lot of attention? Are they moving at shows? Are you moving a lot of skinks?
Yeah. They're very active.
Your keeled bellies, are you selling a lot of those too at your shows? What are people buying the most when you go to a show? What's your hot items?
Oh, it's so hard to say. I always move. The benefit of what I do is that you can't go wrong with diversity, right? So like if you only do Cresties,
you damn sure can't.
And you have a show that's a lot of Cresties, then you might not sell anything at all because the market was saturated and like your stuff might be too expensive or whatever. When you have diversity, I'm not saying I'm killing it. Like there's a lot of shows where I only make a couple $100, and like that is debatably not worth my weekend. But I am gonna move some animals. To be honest with you, the skinks do really well. The zebra skinks are my favorite, and they're such insanely underrated, phenomenal pets. You can
zebra skinks? I don't even know if I know. What's the scientific name for those?
Trachylepsis dichroma. I'll pull up a picture. They're amazing. They're live bearers, which is a favorite of mine. I hate.
Just gonna ask that, man. How many live bearing species are you working with?
A ton. It's
really
a major focus of mine. I don't have an incubator. I know they're not that expensive, but they fail. They stress me out. I don't want to do it.
Oh, they're cool, dude.
It's so funny. I'm so lazy. I have a wide collection, and I'm so weird about certain things. I don't want an incubator. I feel like they're going to be like a fire hazard or they're just going to die. Here's a great picture. I mean, look at that male. Is incredible. So they're sexually dimorphic. So that's a male. That's an adult male. And then the females retain the zebra pattern of the babies. And so when they're born, pretty early on, they start to differentiate. And so I can sex them pretty early. They're live bearers. They'll they'll give birth to up to...
It's showing four.
It's
four babies?
4 to 9. They can have a big litter.
Wow.
And so they eat...
Dude, that makes me... And I want a live bear.
Get some for me. They're the best.
Dude.
So here you go. That's the male with the orange coming in. These are juveniles. And then that's the female with the more stripy zebra pattern. And what's really cool is they can live as a family unit. So the babies can live with mom and dad. They can live together. They eat Pangea. They eat wet cat food. They eat any bug. And right out of the egg...
Babies are gorgeous.
Right out of the womb, they can you can hold them. They're like very personable. They do need heat, which sometimes will turn people off if you're coming from kind of like more of like the cresty.
How hot would you say? You need like a basking area?
5 to 100, like let them cook, in a spot. And I do think UVB would be a really wise.
Where are they from? Africa?
Kenyan zebra skink is their full name or common name. So yeah, you find them in Kenya. They're freaking cool. And what's crazy is like there's other Trachylepsis, so the same genus, that lay eggs instead of our live bearers. And that's pretty wild that within the same genus, because half of all skinks are live bearers and the other half lay eggs. So like blue tongue skinks are live bearers. Ocellated skinks, which I also breed, are live bearers. But fire skinks lay eggs. And so there's another Trachylepsis called the African lined skink. And they look like the East Coast skinks. They got a blue tail. They're black and white with stripes. And those all lay eggs. The broad-headed skinks lay eggs.
I was just gonna ask. The ones near us, they lay eggs. These ones out here.
And so that was when you were asking me, like, have you ever had anything produce in captivity? And like, yes. Yeah. But I had a really hard time keeping them alive. It's a conversation for like a different time. But they seemed very sensitive to hydration. Too much and too little bit me on both ends for incubation and when they hatch. But look at this. This is on my Instagram, and this is a whole bunch of baby Kenyans.
Yeah, dude, that's freaking cool, dude.
Yeah, they're freaking
that's real cool. That's like...
They're dope. Best pet. And I say this, it shows. I tell everyone, they're like, what is this? And I said, it's the best pet that nobody knows about.
Really? See, because that's going to be... I'm going to give you the chance. When we end this, I have a good question for you.
Okay.
That's awesome.
They're freaking dope.
Have you ever thought about keeping, like, the monkey tail skinks?
So I have one. I have a lone male.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I could, if I wasn't on my computer, I would take you to see it. So
that's
I have one.
Cool.
I got a hell of a deal. Once again, I have my hard rule of like, they go for $1,200 wild caught, which is bananas. Yeah, and I had a really good buddy of mine. He like just needed some money, and I was like, okay, if you make me a deal, I'll pay you cash, and like we'll get this done. And so I got it for considerably less than $1,000, which is awesome. And I was kind of like, okay, this is my biggest reptile. It's going to need a ton of space. But everything I had seen told me that I wanted to do this. And those are live bearers, right? And so then they eat plants, which is really cool. And not a lot of skinks will eat exclusively vegetation. And so, yeah, I got this thing. It's in a massive, it's like 120 gallon, something like that. It's like a really large tank. And it's just got 2 vertical branches with cork rounds built in. And then I custom made the wall, and it's got cocoa fiber. Cool. They eat Pangea. They'll eat pieces of fruit. You can feed them like watermelon, cantaloupe, all kinds of guava, I think. And then I just feed them like lettuce and like random stuff. And it's so, my gosh, dude, they're so personable. If you come into the tank, they go like this. It's actually really intimidating. And they do it like that, where it's like sort of spastic, and then they come forward and they kind of drift. And then they do it again. And so it's like really weird when I come in there. And I do not want to get bit because they have serrated teeth. That's how they eat pothos in the wild. So you can actually feed them. I propagate pothos. You can feed them freaking pothos, which are toxic to cats and dogs. Like you cannot. If I eat this, I'd probably get sick. But they can eat them, and they do in the wild, the Solomon Islands. And what's really cool about them, I know I'm geeking out here, but the Solomon Islands is one of the only places on Earth that stays almost exactly constant 80 degrees, where there is no night drop. There is no seasonal variation. They're literally 80 degrees, high humidity, year-round. There is no...
They're going to be like right on the equator or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are. And so that's like super freaking cool. And I have kept, up until very recently, a trio of Solomon Island tree skinks, which are the emo tree skinks. It's the same deal. I just I keep them in the hot... But the monkey tails are dope. They will cut you up bad because they have it's not on purpose, but they have huge nails. And like, I've never been bit. It's a lot of like kind of bluffing. Like when they do this, they're kind of like testing you or just seeing what you are. But people have gotten bit, and I bet it sucks.
Really? I've never heard a bad thing about them. I actually...
Another joke.
Either one of those like bucket list animals, like that's one of those...
It was mine until last year when I made it happen.
Golden, that's like the animal to have. Yes. Like that's they have a very elite status, if you will. They're they're like right with the earless monitors and Boland's pythons. Like they have that same elite status. Maybe you can get them for a little cheaper than that, but they still have I've never heard a person say a bad thing about them. Like I only ran into people that have good things to say about them or dream of keeping them. Like
even wild caught, they're extremely hardy. They're sort of like the Indonesian blue tongue skinks, where like I don't love that they're imported. And to be honest with you, we're very close to the end of importation of monkey tails.
Really?
We're very close. And that's probably a good thing because they just are not doing well in the wild due to deforestation and the importation process. Poaching is like a huge deal. But if you get them, even if they're wild caught, they're pretty damn hardy. And then, like I said, they're relatively... The biggest thing with skinks that I think people don't get into them is that they're almost impossible to sex. So the one I got was paired with another one, and they never produced, right? Which either tells you it's a male-female that didn't want to mate, or it was a male-male, female-female, probably most likely female-female, No one
Say
knows.
probably both girls.
And so sometimes the only way you can really sex these things is actually to take it in for like an MRI and do like a radioscopy.
Really?
And you can actually see the hemipenes. I know people who have done this for blue tongues. And it's the same thing with blue tongues, right? Like they're sort of sexually dimorphic in the head shape, but that's not a good way to do it because I've done that and I've been wrong. It's almost like the only way you can know.
Expensive experiment.
Well, that's the thing, right? So if you want a pair of monkey tails, you're looking at a minimum of probably $2,000, which so the monkey tails, it's really cool that I have one because I grew up 2 blocks from the Seattle Woodland Park Zoo, and I used to work there, and they had one of the best reptile houses. It actually burned down, which is crazy sad. While I was living pretty close by, and
the animals? Did they save the animals?
Almost everything died. Yeah, it sucked. It was the worst. And some of them were obviously endangered. You know, they had some crazy rare stuff. But seeing that on display, and then the fact that I have one and I'm keeping it in a larger tank than they were keeping it, is like it blows the levels of imposter syndrome that I feel sometimes. And so for a long time, it was totally unattainable because I just, like I said, I have a hard, it's kind of funny. We talked about it earlier, but we're coming back. I have a really hard and fast rule where just personally, everyone thinks I'm like a big time deal. I'm actually very much not. And so I have some pretty hard rules budgetarily of like, I cannot go over $1,000 on one animal. And so I always thought they were going to be outside of my range, or like maybe someday if I was retired and I could budget for this. But then this opportunity came to get it for like a lot less. And so I was like, okay, fine, then we're going to do it. And I got this tank like very shortly after and it worked out. And I think
sometimes stuff like that happens, man. It fits what you're doing, though. You know, it's you got to have a little. You know, you got your animals that are obviously bring you joy, but there's nothing wrong with you having a species or two that are like your personal thing.
Oh, I have a ton of lone males. It's so bad, but that's why people sometimes are like, "Oh, I saw you're selling your like Blazodactyls. Are you getting out?" It's like not totally, but I do need the money to fund some of these other, and that was a big. This year, I sold a lot of rare lone males,
you did
like the rough snout and the Thecodactylus. And what that allowed me to do was to pay for this monkey tail. And
who did you sell the rough snout to?
Text me after, and I'll tell you why after. I'm just not sure if he wants me to say because he picked it up and like it was expensive, and I think is getting out of the hobby. I just don't want to put him on blast if he's not. I'll text you.
I dream of those things, man.
They're pretty cool. They're little mean, little flighty.
Really?
A little bit like
you have a lesser? Did you have a lesser?
It was I paid less than $1,000, but it was still a lot. So it was.
No, I'm saying, you had a lesser or the greater?
Yeah. Well, because I laugh because the greater are like 3,600 each or something crazy. I could never afford a greater. No. But
I know nothing about him, like I said. But Thursday, I'm interviewing the Rock's Gecko, and he breeds both of them. I'm like just dumb. I look at them, and they have the same elite status as the monkey tail to me. They're up there with those animals. They're like, I don't know that I could.
Yeah.
I get the money because God knows I make the money. Not to sound smug, but it's spending it, right? Like I have a limit in the morals where I'm like, I got a family, dude. I have a wife. I can't just go and spend $5,000 on an animal and expect everybody to be okay with it. Like I have a house to take care of.
A mortgage, right? Yeah. So I don't want to come off as like, because for me, it's absolutely not all about the money. I think one of the coolest things about this hobby is that instead of like, if I was into like pimping out Miatas, it would just be like a money pit. Or if I bought like a Tesla Cybertruck, maybe I could do it, but it would really put me in the hole. The cool thing about this hobby is like through the Cresties and some of the stuff that I breed, I'm not even like, honestly, I don't even think I'm really profitable most years, but I'm breaking even. And that in itself is pretty cool that I can sell some animals that I, paid for a long time ago. They're worth more now because they're adults or they're proven. And then I get that money back. And I'm like, sweet. So now I have a budget, right? And that's how I got the monkey tail. That's why on Morph Market right now, you're seeing me sell some of these rarer. It's like I'm selling geckos that either I don't see as often as I'd like to justify their continued rent in my house.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I've done it and I've really enjoyed it and I'm ready to move on to this new thing. But until that tank is free, until that heat lamp is free, that outlet or the money is available, now I can move on to something that I'm going to be even more jazzed. And like, believe me, brother, the monkey tail, it's like, if people ask me, like, if you could only keep one thing, it would be like a Chihuahua, it'd be a Cuban false chameleon, be that freaking monkey tail, and like I don't know, it'd be some of the emerald tree skinks. Like if I could only keep 4 or 5 animals, if I was like dying of cancer in a hospital, I'd have a tank with a Chihuahua in it. You know, I told my wife that. I was like, I would have a Chihuahua next to the hospital, to the bedpan. It would be
not even a question. Chihuahua is Chihuahua.
The personality, the color, the handleability.
Favorite animal. 30.
Dude, I went crazy this year because the price came way down, and so I finally was able to get like a group of them, and I wanted to be like really serious about breeding them too. And the white collars that used to be like 15 grand, you can now get a baby white collar for like $400, which is like, dude, go mow some lawns. You can afford that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's gonna be the slogan on the back of my shirt, because I have a lot of people message me. I'll kind of like end on this or get close to I do got to go in like a couple minutes here, but people will
totally understand.
This is the pet peeve. Don't do this. People will message me, and I'm holding a fossil. This is a fossil termite.
Badass.
People
I have them all around my room too.
Oh yeah, I got a little stone collection on the little.
Oh shit, man, we got a lot of things in common, kid.
Yep. I want to meet you at a show up north.
Absolutely. I have my rainforest right there where I grow all my plants. Love plants, man. I mow my fossils. I
got like a crystal and all kinds of whatever. People message me and they're like, "Are you open to trades?" And it's like, first of all, don't ask, "Am I open to trades?" Just lead with, "I have this." Because then what's crazy is I will say, "Maybe, what do you have?" And then they'll say, "What do you want?" And I'm like, okay, we were wasting a lot of time here that you could have just skipped. And then, like, to be honest, I really don't want trades because, as we've already established, almost everything I work with, other than the Cresties, is rare. Like, I don't have a ball python. I almost don't have anything other than the Cresties, which is fun for me. I like dowels and lilies and darks and cappuccinos. Other than the Cresties,
they support everything you do on bad years, man. No matter what, they move.
Exactly. It's operational cost. But I don't keep basic animals. And so when someone comes to me and they want a Leachianus or a rough snout gecko, and these are animals that cost $1,000 at adult size or more, and they're coming at me with like a PetSmart crested gecko or a leopard gecko or like a ball python or a corn snake, it's actually a huge insult to the amount of money and care. And then once again, if you're going to do that, because I have taken trades, but what I'm looking for is so rare, you probably don't have it. And I've only had like 2 exceptions, and Jason is one of them. He approached me about, and I'm sure he's fine with me saying this, he approached me about the velvet geckos because he was like, it's money, right? It costs money and they're not cheap. They're rare. So, it was like $350, $400 for the pair. And I think that's pretty reasonable. He's like, would you trade for some Chihuahua? I was like, yes, because Chihuahua are rare and they're not cheap and I don't breed a lot of them. And so to me, that was like, absolutely.
So you're getting that pair from him? I wanted that pair myself. Yeah, man.
It was a pretty fair deal for both of us.
That male dude.
Yeah. I was stoked to.
Dude, he's fire. He's from Richie too. I think Richie produced him.
Actually, juvies.
Huh?
These are actually. No, I'm getting juvies. I'm getting young juvies from him. They're not.
All right.
But I love that it's going to a buddy of mine. And once again, it's the mutual level of respect. He didn't come to me with a $40 spotty, no crested gecko from PetSmart. He was like, "These are high value animals. Your animals are also high value and rare." And so I was thrilled to I love Chihuahua. You know what I mean? And so and then the fact that it's going to him, if I ever want them back or if I want some babies that they're going to produce, because they're laying right now, like he's going to be producing them. I cool them down for winter. I know where I can get them. And I love that too. It's not going to like an unknown.
Yeah, that's awesome because I know I'm getting them now.
They're great. And I sold the babies like so cheap. Sometimes people will sell them for like $150. I was selling mine for like $80. I mean, stupid cheap. $100. And they didn't always move. They would just sit on Wharf Market. And I'm like, really?
Not to sound smug, but my cheapest animal, maybe $700. I got some of these Chihuahuas, some of those babies. I spent a lot of fucking money, man.
I'm telling you, though, this is Murphy's Law. Now that I'm giving them to Jason, I promise you because we're definitely coming very close also to a Madagascar importation ban.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Killing that fucking island, man.
It's going to happen. And as soon as it does, Jason's like couple $100 geckos are going to be worth like $1,000. And I'm going to be kicking myself. Because once again, it's not about the money, but it does fund my activities.
He probably wouldn't even charge you, man. Like, he always wants to give me animals, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not taking no animal from you unless you let me give you money, bro. Like, I'm not.
I mean, I'm probably sitting on a couple eggs. I let them incubate in the tank, and so if they hatch, like, I'm not selling him eggs, so like, I'll hold some back.
Do they glue them? Are they gluers? Do they glue to the glass?
They're kind of weird. They bury, but they're
Really?
kind of hard shell, like a day gecko. So you can hold it, but you can also smush it. You have to be careful; they'll crack. And I actually, I always incubate them in the tank. I've pulled them out before if I can find them, but digging for them in the way that I have my setup is actually kind of gravelly. So digging for them is a risk to the eggs because I might move a rock that's fatally scratches an egg.
Absolutely.
I've incubated them in Pangea hatch. It's just like whatever temp. They do hatch. It's fine.
Good. I think it could be done with a lot more species than people do. I genuinely believe most of these animals are living in trees or laying their eggs at the bottom of these trees. Where are those baby geckos going when they get out of the tree? They're going up the tree. You mean to tell me that every parent gecko is eating the baby? We'd have no geckos in the wild.
Right. And I also let my eggs have I really got to go, but they have I let all my eggs have a night drop too. Because in the wild, even if they're buried underground, the ground temperature does change at night.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Right. So let everybody know. I got time for my one last question for you is if you could suggest one pet, one obscure animal that nobody knows about that would make a great animal, great pet for somebody, an animal that would make a great pet for somebody. What animal would you suggest someone has that nobody keeps?
Yeah, absolutely. Trachylepsis dichroma, the Kenyan zebra skink. They can eat a wide variety of food. They need a heat lamp, but it's not insane. They're live bearers. If you want to breed, you don't have to incubate. And the babies are stupid cute and really bold and really handleable. It's everything you would want in a pet. Like literally, their tail regrows if they drop it, which they're not very inclined to do. And if you like a little bit of variety, the males are bright orange. They look totally different than the females. So like literally what more could you want in a reptile other than being room temp? And that would be great. So yeah, that's definitely, and I'll be listing, I don't know. I produce some and I get some from friends of mine. And so that's something that will also, in the next couple months, I actually just sold a whole bunch of them, but I'll have more on my Morph Market soon. Probably the next
Guys, check out Nate's Morph Market. Follow him on Instagram if you don't. Everyone that I know follows him. Check him out. Kid's got a lot of cool things going on.
Thanks.
Follow him on Instagram. Like I said, you'll probably see the shows he's going to, where he's going to be, what venues he's at. Check out his availability on Morph Market. Great kid, runs a great business.
Thank you.
Definitely takes care of his animals.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything I didn't say? Is there anything else you want to let people know?
No, it's nature_Nate_Geckos. It's the same almost everywhere. So I don't really do TikTok, but I'll have YouTube videos soon, and I'll post that on my Instagram. I'm also on Palm Street. That's the only other one I'll say is I have one of the most diverse palm streets out there, just for the same reason of just like I'm just too ADD to just stick with one species.
That's great, man. Real reptile enthusiasts love going to a show and walking up to a table and seeing variety. There's nothing worse than walking into a show and seeing ball python, crested gecko, ball python, crested gecko. Like, people want to go into a show and say, what is that? I know it could be annoying, but that's what real enthusiasts want. You want to walk up to a table and say, what the hell is that?
Absolutely.
You got it going on, kid. Again, I appreciate you coming by, man. So much respect and love for you, Nate, man. Honestly, total pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me again on the podcast. I love it. Keep killing it, because I listen while I'm feeding my animals.
Thank you for the support, brother. All right, guys, have a great night. Have a great morning. Whenever you listen to this, stay positive. Enjoy your animals. Catch you in the next one. Peace.